Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the Extra Mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mummy, owner of the Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 284 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is your host, Jackson Mummy. I'm feeling in the holiday spirit. Got to tell you, as this episode comes out, will be a week until Christmas. That is amazing to me. Very excited. We've got our family coming to visit. We're going to take a couple of weeks off, actually. So we will actually be pausing the podcast. Typically, we release on Wednesday mornings. So this year, that happens to be Christmas and New Year's. So we are going to take 2 weeks off, let us catch up with our family and give you a chance to catch up a little bit as well. If you are feeling a withdrawal pangs from the Extra Mile, you can always go onto our website at celebrationbarreview.com and click on the button for case studies. You will see in the menu podcasts. We have all of our podcasts going back to episode number 1 on the archive there. So feel free to check those out. Just do a search for some terms of interest to you. And somewhere in those previous 283 episodes, there's probably something that'll be interesting to you. Now, in today's episode, we're actually in the middle of a 3-part series. We're going to go today to episode 2 of our 3 Voices of Failure. Last week, we talked about the voice of fear. Today, we're going to talk about the voice of cynicism. And when we return in 2020, right after New Year's, we're going to talk about the voice of judgment. And this is a series that I'm really excited about. It's built on the work of Paul Scheele and learning strategies and a number of neuro-linguistic scientists over many years to look at how the brain focuses and responds and the kind of internal dialogues that we have with ourselves. The voice of fear, the voice of cynicism, and the voice of judgment are all ways that our brains work to protect us from taking risks that are too great or to do things that might be harmful to us. And so they're really good things. Unfortunately, sometimes they get misappropriated and used improperly. And when it comes to studying and taking the bar exam, they can often become enemies instead of helpers. And so in this series, what we've been looking at are the practices that you can employ to help you get past that voice of fear, and today to look at getting past the voice of cynicism. So I hope you'll stick around for that message. I think you're really going to find it useful. And then when we return on January 8th, Wednesday, we will talk about the voice of judgment. Well, if this is your first time on the podcast with us, we're really glad to have you here. We do our podcast episodes in 2 formats, both video and audio. If you'd like to watch the video, you can do that by going to celebrationbarreview.com/284. That's the episode number. If you prefer to listen to the podcast episode, that's great. We encourage you to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or iHeartRadio or radio.com, Spotify, just about any place that podcasts are syndicated. And as I said, you can always find all of the episodes on our website. We do encourage you to subscribe so you don't miss out on a single episode. There's a lot of great information that we want to bring to you and share with you. Now, before we jump into today's message about the voice of cynicism, I want to let you know that our episode is brought to you by our all-new on-demand training session. It's called Do Something Different. Make the next bar exam your last bar exam. This is a look at the 4 steps successful students follow in order to pass. You'll hear case studies from students in their own words about what they did, why it worked, and how they were able to succeed on the bar exam. It's completely free, and it's on demand. You can watch anytime, any place that works best for you. But you do need to register. And to do that, you'll see a button here on the video show notes or on the audio show notes. There's a link. Just go ahead and click on that, and then you can schedule the day and time that work best for you. And if while you're watching this training webinar, you have any questions, you'll be directed to send an email right through the application, and we'll get it, and I assure you we will respond. So it's a terrific training program. We've had thousands of people go through it with great success. We recently updated it to reflect the exams that have just finished, and I think you're going to really like it and find it very helpful. And I encourage you to check it out. Again, the title is Do Something Different, Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. And if you want more details, you can go to celebrationbarreview.com/webinar. We've got more information there as well. Well, I don't want to keep you waiting. I want to jump into today's message. As I said, it's titled The Voice of Cynicism. This is the voice that says I'm not loved or I'm not accepted. And it's an important voice to listen to in certain situations, but it's a very bad voice to listen to when it comes to the bar exam. So let's go ahead and jump into today's message. Well, hello, and welcome back to our second in a three-part lecture series called The Three Voices of Failure. If you were with us for the first lecture, we described the concept of three voices that exist in all of our brains that can impact us in negative ways and lead to failure on the bar exam. In video number 1, I talked about the way that our brains are constructed. And as a brief recap, what I talked about was the idea that we have an ancient brain called a reptilian brain. And on top of that reptilian brain, there is a mammalian brain that's a little more recent. And then we have the new brain, the neocortex, which is what we think of today as our left and right brain. Now, each one of these brains serves a specific function in keeping us alive and safe and well. That oldest brain, the reptilian brain, was designed to protect us against danger. And it is recognized as being the voice of fear. Look out, that big animal is going to eat you. It's a kind of an important piece to have in order to survive. But in our day and age, there aren't too many big animals out there trying to eat us. When it comes to the bar exam, the voice of fear becomes an overwhelming sound for some people because it tells us we are not safe enough. And in the first lecture, I talked about how you can overcome that idea of not being safe enough when it comes to the bar exam through the practice of awareness and trust and surrender. Now, in today's video, we're going to talk about the second of the three voices, which is called the voice of cynicism. And this voice comes from the mammalian brain. And again, as a quick recap, what we said about the mammalian brain is that it's like, it can be either a very quiet, happy, contented cat purring, and I'm not going to try to purr here on the video, or it can be a really frightened animal with its claws out and angry and upset. The mammalian brain was designed to give us the voice that says, I am not loved or accepted enough. You see, it's a part of our human condition to want to be loved and to want to be accepted. And so the mammalian brain is always looking out for anything that would cause us to not be loved or accepted enough. And when it sees something that might exist in that realm, it thinks, oh, that's a problem, and it's what we call the voice of cynicism. And today we're going to look at some practices to deal with the voice of cynicism as it impacts the way you study for the bar exam. And then in the third of our three-part series, we're going to talk about the neocortex and what we would think of as the voice of judgment. And the voice of judgment essentially says, I am not enough. And it's that voice that tells us that we just simply can't be successful. It's the left brain and the right brain not communicating well with each other. Now, if you haven't watched the first video in the series, I encourage you to do that. I think it will give you a good basis for what we're talking about today, but you can certainly watch this as a standalone video, and make sure you check out video number 3 on the voice of judgment as well. All right, well, let's dive into this second voice, the voice of cynicism. And the voice of the cynicism comes, as I said, from our mammalian limbic system. It deals with our self-esteem, and it's there to help us manage anxiety. And boy, there's plenty of anxiety around the bar exam, isn't there? I think for a lot of people, once they get past the voice of fear telling them that it's not safe for them to take the test, then we move into that next level of dealing with the voice of cynicism. I'm not loved enough, or I'm not accepted enough. I'm not good enough for this work that I'm doing. I think that the process of going to law school, hard mental process, not because you're learning new things, although you are, but because you're in a hyper-competitive environment in most cases. And I think the sense of being an outcast, of being an outsider, is a big deal for a lot of people, certainly for a lot of the folks that we deal with here at Celebration Bar Review. When I went to law school, even though it was many, many years ago, I was still older than the traditional law student in a full-time day program, even though that's what I was doing. In fact, there were about 5 or 6 of us in our class at Georgetown Law who really stood out. We were somewhat older. Our study group was made up of someone that had played on Billy Joel's last world tour around the world as a piano player himself. It included the chief of staff for a U.S. senator, and it included the heir to a potato chip company. And we were all older than 22 years old. We'll just leave it at that. And we all met each other because we could look around the room and see that we didn't fit in. We were different. We couldn't hear quite as well. We couldn't see quite as well. And we had had some life experience before we came to law school. And yet the process of law school seems to be one of trying to find a way to fit in, area of expertise. Who do I like? Who am I hanging out with? You know, you think about the cool kids table at junior high school lunch, and, you know, at a school like Georgetown, where we didn't have much in the way of facilities when I was there, just finding a table for lunch was a big deal. And so this voice of cynicism was a big part of the way that I lived my law school experience. We were constantly cynical about everything. Quick aside, I came from a time in law when we talked about deconstruction and critical thinking in the law. And so the whole idea of stepping outside of yourself and looking cynically at what was going on was a big deal at that point in time. But you know, not a lot's changed in those decades that have passed. We're still pretty cynical as a profession. And we're very cynical about the bar exam. And you see this all the time. There has been an incredible growth online of companies that do nothing but write snarky comments about law school and the bar exam. And it's a great growth industry for them because there's a constant flow of people who are interested in knowing that kind of information. And yet, this voice of cynicism can be a real danger to us because it can keep us from learning and growing and doing the things we need to do to be successful. Now, if you have taken the bar exam and not been successful, I venture to say that you probably hear the voice of cynicism pretty loudly right now. That voice that says, I'm not accepted enough, I'm not loved. Why? Because I didn't pass the bar exam. And we make this interesting mental transition that says, if I failed the exam, that means I'm a failure, so I'm not loved. I'm not accepted. I can't be part of the club. I can't join the bar itself. And what an exclusionary way to think about it. In fact, there is a bar. That's why it's called the bar. There was a bar in the Supreme Court, a railing, and you had to be a member of the bar to pass beyond that railing. Well, it's pretty clear who gets in and who has to stay out. And so in our brains, we also have a guardian. We have a gateway. And this guardian has these voices in it. And the voice of cynicism says, look, it will be dangerous for you to try something new, to do something different, because you might not fit in, you might not be accepted, you might not be successful. And that keeps us from doing the thing that we know we should do. The way that this plays out for a lot of bar takers is that they take what I call the big box bar review. And it doesn't matter which one you take, they're all essentially interchangeable, aren't they? They all talk about studying in an 8-week period of time. They all want you to memorize the law. They want you to issue spot when you're writing. They want you to analyze all the questions. They think that cramming is a good thing and flashcards are a great thing. And if you've got some algorithm that tells you some fake way that you're going to get smarter by doing one question and then another question that's built on it, great. But they're all interchangeable. Now, for a very slim majority of people, sometimes that works. But for most people who take the bar exam, they don't pass on their first try. In fact, the average now is getting closer to 3 or 4 tries before someone passes the bar exam. So I think we can say empirically that that approach, even though it probably covers 90% of the bar takers in America, is not one that's overwhelmingly successful. Well, if you were coming down from Mars and you saw that, you would look and say, why are these people doing this thing that doesn't seem to work very well? And the answer very simply is the voice of cynicism. You see, the big box bar reviews know inherently that bar students and law students are afraid. And so in the very first week of law school, or the second week if you're lucky, you will be approached by a very knowing 3L who will tell you, hey, you got to take X big box bar review or you're going to fail the bar. And you're terrified. And you don't know anything. And so you say, oh, sure, where can I sign up and get my free pizza and t-shirt and maybe a study aid book? And you do that. And then suddenly you find yourself locked into their world. And by the time it's your turn to take the bar exam 3-4 years later, you realize that you're in a course that may not be the best for you. And yet you continue on with it, even when you know it's not working. When you can feel in your bones, it's just not right. Why do we do that? It's the voice of cynicism. I don't want to be left out. I want to be accepted. I want to be loved. Look, all my friends are here in the course. It must be good, isn't it? and then the results come out and you find out you didn't pass. And suddenly the voice of cynicism starts to switch. And the voice of cynicism says, I told you this wasn't a good idea. And you say, wait a minute, you told me I had to be there because all my friends were there. And the voice of cynicism, which has a very short memory, says, oh, no, that wasn't it at all. What I was simply telling you is that you're just not good enough to pass the bar. That is really dangerous. And if you've ever had that internal dialogue, just know that you're not alone. You're not crazy. There's nothing wrong with you. It's part of the way that we function as human beings. But it doesn't have to be that way. And the very fact that you are watching this particular message today means that you have at least moved just past your voice of cynicism long enough to say, maybe there's a different way, a different approach, something that would work. But the voice of cynicism will continue to ask you, are you going to be accepted or loved enough if you do this? Or is it too much of a risk to do something, even if it would work for you? It's funny, isn't it? You know, I talked about in the first video that we don't do things intentionally to hurt ourselves, but non-consciously we do things all the time that are not in our own best interest. Well, this is one of those situations in which your gut probably told you in the big box bar review if it wasn't working for you, and yet you stayed there. Now that same gut feeling is telling you, I need to look for something different, something that actually can teach me what I need to know and allow me to use my actual skills. And yet the voice of cynicism continues to raise its head and say, well, maybe that won't work. It won't be good because you'll be different. You'll be somehow strange. So let me talk to the voice of cynicism directly for a minute. If you're looking at a course like Celebration Bar Review, we've been in business for over 25 years. We've helped literally thousands of students. We've helped people who've been taking the bar exam for decades learn how to pass. We've helped people pass the bar exam after 20 or 30 tries or more. We've helped people who are from foreign countries. We've helped people for whom English is not a first language. We've helped single moms and single dads. We've helped people who came from the bottom half of the bottom law schools in America. It can be done. How? By doing something different. And so to the voice of cynicism, I would tell you, relax. It's okay. You're not alone. You're not trying something that's so radically different that no one else has ever done it. This is not a beta test. We've been doing this a long time. All right. Now that I've got the voice of cynicism, at least pondering that for a moment, let's come back and talk a little bit about some actual practices that you can employ to help minimize or mute that voice of cynicism in your life, and certainly when you're studying for the bar exam. There are three practices that the brain researchers, the neurolinguists among us, say are really important to help deal with the voice of cynicism. The first practice is gratitude. You know, very often I think we look at scarcity in the world and we say, there's not enough of, I'm not smart enough, I don't have my bar membership, I didn't graduate 10 spots higher in my class, I didn't go to a better law school, and so on and so forth. But the reality is that you have an enormous amount to be grateful for. The very fact that you are taking the bar exam means that you've succeeded pretty much throughout your life. You know, it's not the failures that get to law school and graduate from law school and take the bar exam. Those people dropped out a long time ago. You're a success. And if you come from an underrepresented group in the bar, it means you're an even bigger success. You know, something I say often to my students when they're feeling and struggling with this voice of cynicism is to ask them how many of their friends in elementary school have gone on to become members of the bar. And almost without exception, they say no one. It just didn't happen. I don't know anybody that grew up with me that went this path. And that's my point. Most of you have succeeded beyond your wildest expectations as a child, or certainly as a young person, to reach this level of being able to take the exam. And I know what you're thinking, and the voice of cynicism is saying, yes, but I failed the exam, so you see I'm really a failure. And that's not true at all. You are successful. And one of the things you want to start doing is focusing on what you're grateful for. You're grateful for an education. You're grateful for an opportunity to take the bar exam. You're grateful for the opportunity to show the examiners really what you've learned and what you know and how you can perform. You're grateful to have the opportunity to practice and to be an asset in your community, in your world, in your life, in all the things that you want to do. And that's just gratitude around the bar exam. There's certainly gratitude that exists for each of us in our personal lives, our families, our friends, the people that we know, the experiences that we've had. There's so many things that we can be grateful for. I've worked with people who've had significant health challenges. And one of the things I found most interesting is that very few of those individuals focus on the health problem. They actually talk about how grateful they are that the health situation is in remission long enough for them to be able to study and work and grow and build in their career. And I think that there's a certain element of gratitude here that just permeates that kind of an individual. You've been around them, you know what I'm talking about. The grateful person is someone you just gravitate to, you feel good about, and you want to be with them. Why is that? Well, when we feel grateful, we feel accepted, we feel loved, we see that we're part of a bigger plan, a bigger universe. If you're a person of faith, I think you can be grateful for your faith. And I think in that gratefulness, you recognize that you are a child of the God of your understanding. As a child of God, you can be grateful for so many things in this world and in this universe. And one of those things to be grateful for is that you have intellect and skill and ability, and you have the opportunity to do something. And I think that when you start focusing on acts of gratitude and expressions of gratitude and looking for the things that you can be grateful for, it changes your entire outlook. The voice of cynicism is no match for the voice of gratitude. And so when you are grateful, good things start to happen. So that's the first practice I would encourage when you're feeling sort of out there and lost and in that sense of not being loved or accepted enough. Now, along with gratitude, we have to talk about a second practice that I think is very much intertwined to that, and that's the practice of forgiveness. And I think there's two kinds of forgiveness that we want to consider. The first is to forgive others. If you're like me, you probably had some people in law school, professors or students or others that weren't very nice. And I have to tell you that it took me a very long time to get over and forgive some of those people. I had people who told me that I wasn't good enough to teach law unless I was going to go to Harvard and cleanse my degree. That seemed like an odd thing to say at the time, and it actually made me very angry. And I felt really hurt by that particular approach. Now, as it turned out, it didn't make a bit of difference at all. And I had to let go of that and forgive some of those people who, as I began to realize later in my career and in my life, they weren't trying to hurt me, they were trying to help me. Forgiveness, though, is a tough thing. And if you've been holding grudges about law school or about your school in general, and some of you are entitled to be angry about your law schools, maybe they told you some things that weren't entirely accurate or entirely true about law or the bar exam or their school or their employment rate or any number of things. It's certainly understandable. But I think there's a point at which you have to start being willing to forgive so that you can move on, so you can move past. I also know people that won't forgive their bar reviews. I'm not a big fan, obviously, of the big box bar reviews, but honestly, there's not a reason to be angry at them. They just do what they do. They have a business model, they follow it, it works very, very well. And if it didn't work for you, okay, it didn't work for you. But to be angry at them is not very useful. Now, I've been the focus of a lot of people's anger over the years because people expect that all they had to do was pay their money and get a box from us and magic would happen and they'd pass the bar. It doesn't work quite like that. And when it didn't, then they became angry at me or angry at Celebration Bar Review. And there are people that are still in that position, I suppose, who refuse to forgive or forget. It doesn't do them any good, though. There's no real purpose to it. I've often wondered why people go on Yelp or some of the online forums to trash businesses that they don't like. Does it make them feel better? Do they think they're really helping the world? I'm not so sure, really. I think it's a form of anger management, but I think in many cases, certainly when you're talking about a big event like the bar exam, it's really a function of being unwilling to forgive. I think forgiveness for a lot of people is one of those difficult things that we have to deal with. And when it comes to businesses, sometimes we don't want to forgive at all. We want to make them the object of our anger. I failed the bar exam because of this company. That's an interesting position to take. I would say that really the truth is, if you failed the bar exam, it's not because of a company. It might be with the help of a company or without the help of a company, but ultimately you're the one that goes into the room and you take the test. And so if you're unwilling to forgive the bar review or your law school or your mentor or whoever it might be, I would suggest there's this second level of forgiveness that we need to deal with, and that's forgiveness toward yourself. Look, we all make mistakes. We all do things we're not proud of. We all do things that we would say in hindsight, I would never have done that. And the practice of forgiveness towards ourselves is one of the most important things that we can do. Paul Sheely at Learning Strategies, who works with us on a lot of our mindset development, talks often about this idea of forgiveness toward yourself. And he says, if you go back in time and you knew back then what you know today, would you have made a different decision? And almost invariably, most of us, when we're in that process of self-hatred or recrimination about the things we did, the mistakes we made, if we asked ourselves that question and we said, well, back in time, if I'd known what I know now, I definitely would have done something different. Then he asked the really important question, well, based on the information you had at that time, did you make the best decision that you could under those circumstances? And again, almost invariably, the answer is going to be yes. Well, the reality is that if you made the best decision you could back then with the information you had back then, why are you still angry at yourself today? You see, part of the process of life is learning. We're smarter, hopefully, today than we were back then. So to come back to our bar review example, if you're beating yourself up because you chose a big box bar review in your second week of law school, well, based on the information you had back then, it looked like a good decision, didn't it? All of my friends were taking the course. They told me it was going to be wonderful, and they gave me a free study guide outline. What could have been better? All right, now I know better. I know it wasn't such a good thing. And so if I'd had that information back then, I probably wouldn't have done that. But there's no reason to beat yourself up over that. And I think the same is true when it comes to the bar exam itself. I talk to students all the time who failed, and they can't forgive themselves for failing. They think that it's their mistake, their error, that they're wrong or bad, that they're less than because they failed the exam. And that's simply not so. The longer you hold on to these things that are weighing you down, that are causing you to listen to the voice of cynicism, the harder it is to move on. It's like an anchor that's dragging you along. And so you have to be able to forgive yourself, and you have to be able to forgive the other people in your world. Now, for some people, forgiveness means you have to look at your family and your friends and the people that told you all throughout your life, you're not smart enough or good enough, or you can't do it, or what are you, crazy going to law school, or crazy to take on the bar exam? Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you stay home and be a mom or a dad, or do something safe? Well, that's their voice of cynicism, and it's their voice of fear, and it's their voice of judgment. It doesn't have to be yours, but you can forgive that. And you can forgive them. And the sooner you block that out and start forgiving, along with gratitude, the less the voice of cynicism will be in your brain, because there's really nothing else to say once you've forgiven yourself. You are accepted, you are loved, and you accept and love other people. Now, it would be nice if we could accept and love everyone all the time in all circumstances. That would be the ideal. It doesn't happen that way. But when you can focus your forgiveness on the people in your smallest circle, it's the best thing for you. And I find that students study better and are more successful when they're in that position of forgiveness and gratitude than when they're in a position of anger and, in some cases, even self-loathing. Well, the third practice that's connected to these first two of gratitude and forgiveness is the practice of kindness. And kindness, you might say, well, what's that got to do with taking the bar? You know, I think it has a lot to do with it, really. One of the things I suggest to my students in the last month or so before the test is to actually get involved in a weekly basis in doing something nice for other people. It doesn't have to be extravagant or big, just something simple. It could be mowing the lawn for a neighbor, or picking up groceries, or stopping and talking to someone that you normally see but don't connect with. It could be spending some time with the kids and giving your spouse a little bit of time off. It could be picking up, coffee for your coworkers, just doing something that's a little bit of kindness. Why would we say that makes a difference on the bar? Well, once you start focusing outside yourself and focusing on the world around you, it tends to give you a better perspective. And in that perspective, you become a smarter, better, more gentle person, kinder person. And those people tend to do better on the exam. When we are focused solely on ourselves, when we are self-indulgent, when we are, in some cases, self-loathing, self-hating, when we are frantic and anxious, bad things happen. But when you get outside yourself, when you look at the bigger picture, when you realize that there are people who have much less than you do, who would give anything just for the chance to be able to take the bar exam, well, it changes your perspective. And it starts to get that mammalian part of your brain to relax a little bit and to feel a little more protected and a little less on edge. I think one of the best things you can do right before the bar exam is to have this broader focus, to spend some time with your family or your friends or your coworkers, to get outside your bar exam world, even if it's just for a little bit of time. Why? Because it's all about perspective. It's about recognizing that this is not the end of the universe for you, and that it's not the end of the universe for all of the people around you at all. They've all got lives and things going on. And when we get that perspective, it then takes the pressure off of us enormously. Then we realize, whether I pass or fail this exam may not be as important as the role model I am for my children, or the way that I function in my community, or the things that I care about and are important to me. Kindness matters. In a world like ours today, where I think kindness is a devalued trait, where we are anxious to rip and tear at every part of the social fabric, where the latest tweet is the latest opportunity to mock and make fun of someone, the voice of cynicism just goes crazy. It loves it. It thrives on it. It wants more of that. Ooh, what did that so-and-so say about so-and-so? It's voyeurism at its worst. And that's a part of the society and the culture that we're in today. But you don't have to buy into that. You don't have to be part of that to feel accepted and loved. By being kind, by being gentle, by forgiving, by having a sense of gratitude, you can have a voice of cynicism that says, hey, you know what? I think we're okay here. I think we're accepted and loved enough, and we can take the risk of trying new ideas and new things in order to be successful, because ultimately this is all part of a grander, bigger plan. Once you've reached that understanding mentally, it all starts to fall into place. So if you've been fighting that, I would say that's one of the reasons that's been happening. Well, I want to talk about a couple of tools that you can use to help you with these practices of gratitude and forgiveness and kindness. Now, as I mentioned in the first video, we employ a set of paraliminal audio recordings that are done by Paul Sheely and Learning Strategies, and we absolutely have found them to be incredibly helpful. We actually curated a set of 16 of these, and we'll put a link to them in the video, and they're wonderful for the bar exam. But I want to highlight a couple of the audios. Now, the way that these paraliminal recordings work is you put on earbuds or headphones, and they take about 20 to 30 minutes, and there's two voices that you hear, one track going to the left brain, one track going to the right brain. We'll talk more about that in the third video when we talk about the neocortex. But essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to get to these voices inside the voice of fear and the voice of cynicism and the voice of judgment. And for the voice of cynicism, the recordings that I think are most helpful include a terrific recording called Letting Go. This is narrated by Paul and by Hale Dwoskin, who is the author of a best-selling book called The Sedona Method. And the Sedona method's been in practice for many, many years, I think now 40 or 50 years. It's a very simple method. It's a great book. You should pick it up if you haven't read it. And essentially it just means letting go. Instead of being clenched fist all the time, it's just opening and letting go of the emotions and the feelings. And it's a way to mitigate the voice of cynicism. So it's a great paraliminal recording that does that and helps move your brain in that direction. Another recording is literally just called Gratitude. It helps focus your brain on the things that you are grateful for. Another of the titles is called Anxiety Free. And obviously, it's a terrific one for bar takers because it gets at what it is that's causing the anxiety, the deeper anxiety, and then it speaks to those problems. And it helps generate this sense of gratitude and forgiveness and kindness to take away the anxiety and replace it with a calmness. And then another of the titles is called Overcoming Overwhelm. A lot of times when we're in that voice of cynicism, we feel overwhelmed. There's just too much there and we don't know what to do with it. And so reaching that point of calmness is very important to help get rid of that sense of not being enough or being loved. And I think those are all great titles, and there are many, many others. Now, we also talked about the practice of meditation. This certainly goes a long way to helping with this voice of cynicism. If you've been meditating, continue to do that. If you haven't, a product that we use is called Holosync Audio Meditation. It comes from Centerpoint Research, and it's a wonderful product. You just put it on, listen to it 30 minutes or up to 60 minutes a day, and it meditates you. And again, we will link to that, and we think that's a great tool to use. I also recommend that you set up some sort of a gratitude journal. If you've never done this, it's a great exercise. You simply set up some place to keep track of the things you're grateful for each day. Just jot down 2 or 3 items every day that you're grateful for. You'll find after you've done this practice for a week or two, that there's a pretty big list there, and it makes you more aware of the things that you're grateful for. And in that focus on gratefulness, what happens is you begin to look for things to be grateful for instead of looking for things to be angry about or things to be cynical about. And I think in a world like ours today, not being cynical is an incredibly important skill set to have. So I encourage you, you can find gratitude journals in lots of different places. Some are very structured, some are very unstructured, but the concept is the same in all of them. We also provide in our course a couple of different resources and tools, and I want to encourage you, if you're in our course, to take advantage of them. If you're not in our course, you might want to check us out in part for these. We have a private Facebook group for our students, and it is a great place to come and feel loved and accepted. It's a safe space. It's not only our current students, but it's our past, former, successful students who stay voluntarily to offer that sense of love and acceptance and help to other students who are going through the process. It is a very affirming, warm place. We don't allow cynical posts. We don't allow negative posts. We just don't do it. It's a safe place. I know safe and Facebook are not always two words we put together, but we've managed to curate that into a really great spot for our students. And then we do what we call group coaching calls. And in these group coaching calls, which we offer every week with members of our staff, we not only focus on accountability, but really on encouragement and study. And in fact, we have a mindset coach that works with our students in these group coaching calls, 1 on 10 or so students, to assist with mindset, to deal with these voices that you might be hearing, the voice of fear or cynicism or judgment, and dealing with them. And in this small group environment, in these video chats, they're wonderful ways to express the very things that you're hearing and to get confirmation and affirmation that there are other practices and ways to resolve it, and that you're not alone in those feelings. So I encourage you to check all of those things out. I think they make a huge difference. We started this video by talking about the idea that we had these 3 voices of failure. And I said that the voice of cynicism was an important one. I want to just finish by saying that it's one of 3 guardians to change that exists in all of our brains. The voice of fear, the voice of cynicism, and the voice of judgment are all guardians that we've got internally built in that keep us from taking risks or making changes that we think might hurt us. But if we can convince the voices that these changes are good for us and not bad for us, then the voices stop. They literally go away and they become voices of encouragement. And that's what I want to tell you today. You can shut down the voice of cynicism. If you've been hearing, I'm not loved enough, I'm not accepted enough, that's a lie. It is not true. And when you acknowledge it as a lie and you begin the practices of gratitude and forgiveness and kindness, amazing things will happen in your life and in your bar studies. Wrap it all up when we talk about the neocortex and the voice of judgment, the voice that says, I am not enough. And for now, take care, and let's keep that voice of cynicism really turned down low. Well, that's our message for this week. I hope that you found it helpful, and I hope that you're able to control that voice of cynicism. Now, as I said, we are going to take a couple of weeks off for Christmas and New Year's, and then we'll be back with the podcast series starting up fresh in 2020 on Wednesday, I think it's January 8th, and look forward to finishing up and wrapping up this series on the 3 voices of failure, and we're going to look at that 3rd voice, the voice of judgment. So stick around, make sure that you check that out. Of course, even though we're taking a couple of weeks off, you can still check out our free on-demand training, Do Something Different, Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. Just click on the show notes link or press the button for the webinar, or you can go to celebrationbarreview.com/webinar and check it out. It's a great program and a wonderful tool to help you get started with your studies for 2020. I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday season and a great start to 2020. Look forward to wonderful things happening for all of you in your bar exams in 2020. And thanks so much to all of you who have been faithful listeners in 2019. We really appreciate it very much. encouraged by your comments and thoughts and phone calls and emails and texts. They are all very encouraging and very supportive, and that means a great deal to me and to our entire team. So on behalf of all of us at Celebration Bar Review, we wish you the very best of the holiday season, and we'll see you again in 2020 along the Extra Mile.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.